The silence in the five-star dining room was sharper than the clinking of silver against porcelain. All eyes were fixed on the small, shivering girl in the faded sundress, and the man holding her hand with a grip that spoke of desperation and fierce protection. When the manager stepped forward to demand they leave, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. A woman draped in diamonds and power stood up from the most exclusive table in the room. The billionaire heiress, known for her cold indifference, was frozen, her gaze locked on the single father. What she said next didn't just stop the security guards. It shattered the room's perception of status forever. The rain lashed against the windows of the old, dented sedan as Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him, 6-year-old Maya was humming a soft, tuneless song, kicking her feet against the seat. Her dress was clean but frayed at the hem, a hand-me-down from a neighbor that Elias had spent an hour ironing that morning. Today was her birthday, and for 364 days, Elias had scrimped, saved, and skipped meals to ensure this one night would be different. He wasn't just a mechanic. Tonight, he wanted to be the father who could give her the world, even if only for a few hours. They pulled up to the gilded entrance of the Gilded Lily, a restaurant, where the menu didn't list prices and the floor was made of polished Carrara marble. Elias felt the familiar sting of insecurity as the valet looked at his rusted car. With a mixture of pity and disdain, he ignored it, stepping out and rounding the car to lift Maya into his arms. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and hope. He straightened his only suit jacket, which was slightly too wide in the shoulders, and walked toward the heavy oak doors. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and aged wine. The lighting was low, designed to make everyone look like a masterpiece. Elias felt like a smudge on a clean canvas. He approached the hostess, a woman whose smile stayed firmly in her cheeks without ever reaching her eyes. He gave his name, mentioning the reservation he had made 6 months ago. She hesitated, her eyes scanning his worn shoes and Maya's plastic barrettes. After a long, deliberate pause, she led them to a small, cramped table near the swinging doors of the kitchen, far away from the velvet booths and the view of the city skyline. Elias didn't complain. He sat down, tucked the napkin into Maya's collar, and watched her eyes widen as she looked at the crystal chandelier above them. For a moment, the world felt soft. He reached across the table and took her small hand. He told her she looked like a princess, and for the first time in months, the heavy weight of being a widower and a struggling worker felt a little lighter. He didn't notice the whispers from the neighboring tables, nor did he see the woman sitting alone at the center of the room, her sharp blue eyes watching them with an intensity that bordered on haunting. The peace was fragile. It broke when Maya, in her excitement, reached for a breadstick and accidentally knocked over a glass of water. It wasn't a catastrophe, just a splash on the white linen, but in a place like this, it felt like a siren going off. A waiter appeared instantly, not with a smile or a reassuring word, but with a heavy sigh that sounded like an insult. He mopped the water with a clinical coldness, making sure to bump Elias's shoulder as he worked. The couple at the next table, dressed in silks that cost more than Elias's annual rent, didn't hide their annoyance. The woman leaned over to her husband and whispered loudly enough for Elias to hear that some places really ought to have a stricter dress code to keep the element out. Elias felt the blood rush to his face. He wanted to snap back, to tell them that his money was just as green as theirs. But he looked at Maya. She had stopped humming. Her shoulders were hunched, and she was staring at her empty plate, her joy evaporating in the heat of their judgment. The manager, a man who moved as if he were made of starch, approached their table. He didn't lean in. He stood over them, creating a shadow. He spoke in a low, oily tone, suggesting that perhaps the young lady would be more comfortable in a family-oriented establishment down the street. He mentioned a disturbance, and the comfort of our regular guests was a polite way of saying they didn't belong. Elias felt a lump in his throat. He had followed the rules. He had saved the money. He had respected the etiquette. But to these people, his poverty was a visible stain that no amount of politeness could wash away. Maya looked up at the manager, her bottom lip trembling. She asked if they had to go because she was messy. Elias felt a surge of protective rage, but he kept his voice steady, his hands trembling beneath the table. He told the manager they were staying for their meal. The manager's expression hardened. He gestured to a security guard near the door. The tension in the room rose until it was a physical pressure, a silent cheering from the elite patrons who wanted the eyesore removed. They wanted their bubble of perfection restored, and they didn't care whose heart they broke to do it. Just as the security guard placed a hand on the back of Elias's chair, the clatter of a fork hitting a plate echoed through the room. It came from the center table. Elena Vance, the heiress to a shipping empire and a woman known for being as ruthless in business as she was, silent in social circles, stood up. She didn't look at the manager. She looked directly at Elias. The room went dead silent. Elena was the person everyone in that room was trying to impress, the sun around which their social world orbited. She walked across the marble floor, her silk gown hissing against the stone. Every head turned, expecting her to deliver the final blow that would banish the father and daughter from the premises. Instead, she stopped inches from the manager. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone was cold enough to frost the windows. She asked the manager if there was a problem with her guests. The manager stammered, his confidence vanishing like smoke. He tried to explain that there was no relation, that these people were intruders. Elena ignored him. She looked down at Maya and offered a small, genuine smile that transformed her face from a mask of stone into something human. She reached out and touched the girl's frayed sleeve. Then she looked at Elias. He was frozen, confused and wary. He didn't know this woman, and he didn't trust the wealthy. But when he looked into her eyes, he didn't see pity. He saw a shared grief, a recognition that transcended the bank accounts and the fancy clothes. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent restaurant. She told the manager that Elias and Maya were with her, and if they were asked to leave, she would ensure that every contract her family held with the restaurant's parent company was terminated by sunrise. She then pulled out the chair next to Maya and sat down. She told the waiter to bring the finest chocolate cake in the kitchen and to bring it immediately. The manager backed away, bowing and apologizing profusely, while the gossiping couple at the next table suddenly found their own shoes very interesting. For the next hour, the restaurant watched in stunned silence as the most powerful woman in the city shared a meal with a mechanic and a 6-year-old. Elena didn't talk about stocks or galas. She talked to Maya about her favorite cartoons and her birthday wishes. She listened to Elias talk about his late wife and the struggle of balancing 3 jobs with the desire to be a present father. As they talked, the walls Elias had built up began to crumble. He realized that Elena wasn't performing an act of charity. She was seeking a connection. Elena revealed that 20 years ago, she had been that little girl. Her father had started with nothing, and she remembered the day they were kicked out of a park because they didn't look like they belonged. She told Elias that she spent every day surrounded by people who loved her money, but hated her history. She saw in Elias a dignity that the people in that room couldn't buy with all the gold in the world. She saw a man who would walk through fire for his daughter, and it reminded her of the only person who had ever truly loved her. The emotional peak came when Maya reached out and gave Elena a hug. It was a simple, sticky, honest embrace. Elena froze for a second, her eyes glassing over, before she wrapped her arms around the child. In that moment, the hierarchy of the room was completely inverted. The wealthy patrons looked small and hollow, while the trio at the table seemed like the only real people in the building. Elias felt a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't a failure. He was exactly where he needed to be. As the meal ended, Elena leaned in and whispered something to Elias. She told him that she owned a fleet of vehicles that needed a master mechanic, someone she could trust not to overcharge or cut corners. She didn't offer him a handout. She offered him a career. She handed him a card and told him to show up on Monday. Elias looked at the card, then at his daughter's happy, chocolate-smeared face. The weight that had been crushing his chest for years finally lifted. He realized that the night hadn't just been about a birthday dinner. It had been about the moment his life changed forever. They walked out of the restaurant together, flanked by the same manager who was now holding the door open with a terrified grin. The rain had stopped, and the city lights were reflecting in the puddles on the pavement. Elena's limousine was waiting, but she chose to walk Elias and Maya to their beat-up sedan. She didn't look at the rust or the dented bumper. She looked at the man who had kept his head high even when the world tried to bow it. She shook his hand, a firm, respectful grip, and thanked them for the best dinner she'd had in years. As Elias drove home, the heater in the car finally kicked in, warming the small cabin. Maya was fast asleep in the back, her head resting against the window. A small plastic crown Elena had requested from the kitchen perched on her hair. Elias looked at the business card on the dashboard. He knew that the struggle wasn't entirely over. Life is never that simple, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the future. He had seen the best and worst of humanity in a single evening, and he had come out on the other side with his pride intact. The lesson of the night stayed with him long after the engine was turned off. He realized that true status isn't found in the label of a suit or the name on a reservation. It's found in the courage to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Elena Vance had used her power not to dominate but to shield, and in doing so, she had found the one thing her billions couldn't buy: a moment of genuine human grace. Elias carried Maya into their small apartment, tucked her into bed, and sat by the window, watching the sun begin to peek over the horizon. The story of the single dad and the billionaire heiress became a legend in the city, a reminder that kindness is a currency that never devalues. Elias went on to manage Elena's entire fleet, eventually opening his own shop with her backing. Maya grew up knowing that she belonged in any room she chose to enter. And Elena? She was no longer the heiress. She became a frequent guest at a modest house for Sunday dinners, where the food was simple, the laughter was loud, and the love was unconditional. Sometimes the world tries to tell us where we belong, based on what we have, rather than who we are. But as Elias and Maya discovered, one act of courage can change the narrative of a lifetime. True wealth isn't held in a bank account. It's held in the heart of a parent who refuses to give up, and in the hands of a stranger who chooses to reach out. Never judge a book by its cover, and never silence your voice when you see an injustice. You never know when your kindness might be the miracle someone has been praying for.